Today, we're going to be looking at 22 players that you can draft in fantasy football this year. We're going to be looking at their ADP per underdog fantasy. We're going to be looking at their advanced metrics and everything else. But before we dig in, you need to click that subscribe button right now. We're helping you build your fantasy teams. We're going to help you win your drafts, especially as we get deeper into the season. We're going to talk more about these players. We're going to talk about late round stashes, everything else. Click that button. Stop missing out. We're going to talk about our first player today, and that's CJ Stroud. One of the top quarterbacks in fantasy. Going into year 2, they added Stephon Diggs. They added Joe Mixon. They got the capital to do that because he's on a rookie contract. Multiple QB1 weeks, 22.1 points per game. And I only see it staying the same or getting better. 300 air yards a game. Over that, 33.8 pass attempts per game. And he was slinging it deep with a 56.9% deep ball rate. 73.6% of his passes were catchable. We're adding Stephon Diggs. We got more weapons now. Why not CJ Stroud but Devonta Smith? Wide receiver 24 in ADP. Getting drafted around the 2nd round. And he's a very stable asset in fantasy. Multiple wide receiver 1 weeks along with wide receiver 2 weeks. And then his down games are very stable. Averaging 14.2 fantasy points per game. Joe Mixon added to the Texans. Added to CJ Stroud. And when he's on, and he's mostly at RB1 on most weeks, and that's what he is, and his down weeks aren't that bad either, and we're with a prolific team here, and we're going cheap in round 6. George Pickens, wide receiver 28, round 4 draft capital. We have Russell Wilson, Justin Fields. He's got rapport with Justin Fields from back in high school. Russ Wilson loves to throw the deep ball, so he might get more opportunity. He might push for a 25+% target share this year and get more air yards per game. Rachaad White, RB15 in redraft right now, round 6 draft capital per underdog fantasy. A lot of RB1 weeks due to his ability to catch the ball in the backfield. That gives him a stable floor and also adds to his upside, getting 15.8 rushing attempts per game and getting a 72.3% opportunity share. One of the top running backs when it comes to workload in the NFL. Sam Laporta, the tight end 1. I just don't see him getting less than a 20% target share. He might add on that. We might see him finish the season with a 22+% target share. That being said, that's going to make him a stable asset in fantasy football. So if you got FOMO at the tight end position, you may want to pay up for Sam Laporta. Zay Flowers is a stable wide receiver that you can kind of catch on the cheap. He's going into year 2, so he might show you more upside this year. But his bottom games aren't that bad, and he's also showing you some upside. He's flashing at with 4 wide receiver 1 weeks, a couple wide receiver 2 games, but we're looking good. Alvin Kamara, the old faithful here, good in the passing game, catches a lot of balls, gets a good opportunity share, pushing 70%. On top of that, 13 rushing attempts per game, getting almost 7 targets per game and almost a 20% target share. He's got some upside in round 7. Could be an RB1 for you who averaged 17.9 points per game. T. Higgins, wide receiver 27 in ADP, round 4 draft capital, was injured often last year. Contract negotiations this year. But when you look at his production portfolio from last year, he's hitting, he's missing, but he had some big weeks. On top of that, in previous years, same situation, same story with Joe Burrow and company. You're paying more than wide receiver 27. You're catching him at a discount this year. Zamir White, RB23, almost an RB3 territory in round 8 draft capital. He's not going to catch a lot of balls, but he's projected to get a lot of work out of the backfield. Probably going to be one of the top running backs in opportunity share if he remains healthy. That's what we saw in the back end of the season. So that is something we could easily project, and he's cheap. Marquise Hollywood Brown. The Chiefs needed another wide receiver. They got one in free agency here. We got good speed. We got good route running. He should pair well with Patrick Mahomes. Look for him to get a 20+% target share. Look for him to get those deep balls. Look for him to have some splash games this year. Cheap with round 5 draft capital. The market's down on him. They should be much higher. James Conner, RB26, round 8 draft capital. Another old faithful, but when he's healthy, when he's on the field, he can produce, and you can catch him cheap in drafts. So if you're going 0 RB or hero RB, he might be one of the targets you're looking at. Deontay Johnson, wide receiver 44 in ADP, round 7 draft capital. A cheap wide receiver to look at, but he's going to be the wide receiver 1 for Carolina. He's going to get a bulk of the targets, and look at what he did last year. 11.7 points per game, 1 wide receiver 1 week, multiple wide receiver 2 games, but his downside games weren't too bad. We had some low games, like 3 of them, but still, he's able to give you some stable production. I imagine we're going to see better targets this year in Carolina. Zach Moss is a very dependable running back playing for the Bengals. Look for him to get some opportunities up the gut there with Cincinnati. Might be more productive than what you realize. Kind of like what we saw with the Colts last year. Round 8 draft capital. Another cheap get to look at for the running back position. Rashee Rice probably going to get suspended. Wide receiver 41 though. Look at the back end of the season. Very dependable for Patrick Mahomes. Looking good at minicamp. It's going to have some upside there. When I say looking good at minicamp though, I'm saying like one of the best players at Chiefs practice every day at minicamp when he was on the field. Look at him at this cheap price tag, because if he comes on late in the season, it might be a big get for you. Devin Singletary, he's going to get a lot of workload with the Giants. He's very dependable. He's going to be on the field. He's good in pass protection. We saw that in Houston. He was productive in Houston. Might be productive again with the Giants. We're looking at Eric Gray and Tyrone Tracy, but still Devin Singletary is going to get the chance to be the guy early in the season. Chris Godwin's going to get more opportunity in the slot. That's what they're saying. When he gets more opportunity in the slot, he's a more stable fantasy asset. When he's seeing a 70% slot rate or higher, last year almost 8 targets per game, should be something similar to that. But look for him to give you a good return on investment with him getting round 5 draft capital or later in redraft. Wide receiver 41 ADP, looking good to go at the price. Chase Brown, RB37, round 11. We talked about Zach Moss, but Chase Brown, shot out of a cannon, has a lot of upside, a lot of speed, and a lot of gusto. 1.2 targets per game, but again, it's what he did in the back end of the season. Showed a lot of pop in the open field there, and could be the guy there for Cincinnati if given the opportunity. Christian Watson, another Will Fuller type of wide receiver where he's going to give you splash weeks and down games. And if you want that type of wide receiver, go ahead. Wide receiver 45, round 7 draft capital, could give you a good ROI if he stays healthy and get those deep targets. Ezekiel Elliott, RB38, round 11 draft capital. If you need a dependable running back, if you're hurting, if you need some depth, this could be your guy. He's going to be at Dallas. They're saying they're going to mix it up with the touches, but he's so dependable in pass protection, he has to be on the field. Cooper Kupp, wide receiver 22, round 3 draft capital. An old faithful. He does not look like the Triple Crown threat anymore, but he can still pack fantasy points in bunches. 4 wide receiver 1 weeks last year and a wide receiver 2 week. Can get it done for you, but just do not have the expectations that he's going to be the best wide receiver in the league anymore. Kendre Miller, cheap upside, a cheap handcuff. Something happens to Alvin Kamara, he might be good to go. He might be good to go anyway. He's starting the season healthy and fresh, has good pop and step, round 3 draft capital with upside. Be on the lookout for him. Those are 22 players that we're looking at in fantasy football. We're going to be looking at a lot more players, so make sure to hit that subscribe button. We're going to talk about strategies coming up. We're going to be talking about players. We're going to talk about the rounds of the draft. Everything else, click that button. Stop missing out. I want to thank you for watching, and I'll catch you on the next video.